I stood in Leah Zook's sitting room on the morning of November 14, 1983, holding a piece of paper that should not have existed. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, not from age, from the realization that for 32 years I had been signing documents I had no authority to sign. The paper was yellow, the ink was brown, the wax seal at the bottom was still intact after 96 years, and the signature belonged to Bishop Jacob Yoder, the man who had founded our Gmay in 1887. Leah sat in the chair across from me. She did not speak. She did not need to. The document spoke for her. And what it said was this: I had betrayed every family in our community when I signed the easement agreement with the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission on October 3, 1983. I had done it believing I had the authority. I had done it believing I was protecting the Gmay from a legal battle we could not win. I had been wrong. And Leah Zook, a widow with no formal education and no male family member to speak for her, had proven it. Let me go back to the beginning, not to the morning I stood in her sitting room, to the afternoon 6 weeks earlier, when 2 men in pressed suits arrived at my farm with a leather briefcase and a map of Lancaster County spread across the hood of their sedan. They were from the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. They needed an easement, 40 feet wide, running north to south through the eastern edge of our Gmay's land. It would cut through 3 properties. One of them belonged to Leah Zook. They offered compensation, $4,500 per acre for the land they would take, an additional $3,000 for disruption to farming operations. They said the project was already approved by the state legislature. They said eminent domain gave them the authority to take the land whether we agreed or not. But they preferred cooperation. They preferred a signature. They preferred to avoid a court battle that would cost our community more than the land was worth. I listened. I asked questions. They answered with legal terms I did not fully understand, but that sounded final. Condemnation, public use, just compensation. They said I could sign on behalf of the Gmay. They said bishops had done so in other Amish communities across Pennsylvania. They said it was routine. I told them I would pray on it. They said they needed an answer by October 1st. That gave me 11 days. I called a meeting of the Gmay on the last Sunday of September. 243 people gathered in the barn of Deacon Miller. I explained what the Turnpike Commission wanted. I explained the compensation they offered. I explained that refusal would lead to a court case we could not win because we do not hire lawyers, and we do not fight the government in English courts. I asked for a show of hands. Who believed we should accept the easement? 187 hands went up. Who believed we should refuse? 31 hands. The rest abstained. Leah Zook did not raise her hand for either option. She sat in the back row with her daughter Sarah. She did not speak. I took the vote as approval. On October 3, 1983, I signed the easement agreement in the presence of 2 witnesses from the Turnpike Commission and Deacon Miller. The document was notarized. The compensation checks were issued. $4,500 per acre for the land, $3,000 for disruption. The checks were distributed to the 3 families affected. Leah Zook received her check on October 7th. She did not cash it. I did not think much of that at first. Some families take time to decide how to use unexpected money. Some families pray over it. Some families wait until spring to deposit it so they can use it for seed. But when 2 weeks passed and Leah still had not cashed the check, Deacon Miller mentioned it to me after Sunday service. He said she had been asking questions about the easement, questions about who had the authority to sign it, questions about whether the Gmay vote was binding. I told Deacon Miller that the vote had been clear, 187 in favor, 31 against. The matter was settled. He nodded, but he looked uneasy. He said Leah had been spending time in her sitting room, alone, with the loom. I asked what that had to do with anything. He said he did not know, but he thought I should be aware. There was a loom in the corner of Leah Zook's sitting room, walnut, built in 1887. No one was allowed to touch it, not her children, not her grandchildren, not even her late husband before he passed in 1979. I had been to her home several times over the years. Each time I noticed the loom. Each time I asked about it. Each time she said it belonged to her great-grandmother and was not for use. It was for remembering. I had not pressed further. It was not my place to question what a family chose to remember. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone completely, someone whose authority you never questioned, and then discovered they had signed away something that belonged to you? That was the moment Leah Zook faced on the morning of November 8th, 1983. Except the person she had trusted was me. And what I had signed away was 47 acres of land her great-grandfather had cleared by hand in 1889. Land that had been farmed by 4 generations of her family. Land that would now be split in half by a 40-foot-wide strip of asphalt and guardrails. She did not come to me with anger. She did not come to me with accusations. She came to me with a question. She knocked on my door at 6 in the morning. I was in the barn milking. My wife brought her out. Leah was holding a piece of paper, not the easement agreement, something older. She asked if I had a moment to speak. I said I did. She unfolded the paper on the workbench next to the milk cans. It was handwritten. The ink was faded but still legible. The language was German. Pennsylvania Dutch mixed with High German. At the top of the page were the words Ordnung des Gmay, 1887. Below that were 12 rules. I read them. Most of them I knew. No electricity from the English grid. No automobiles for personal use. No photographs. No pride in dress. But the 8th rule I had never seen before. It said this: Der Bischof darf kein Land verkaufen oder verpachten ohne schriftliche Zustimmung von 2/3 der Gmay. The bishop may not sell or lease land without written consent of 2/3 of the Gmay. I looked at Leah. I asked where she had found this. She said it had been in the loom, hidden in a drawer beneath the warp threads. Her great-grandmother had placed it there in 1887 and told her grandmother to keep it safe. Her grandmother had told her mother. Her mother had. 4 generations of women had known it existed. 4 generations of women had kept it hidden. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever discovered a document that proved everything you believed was wrong? That was the moment I faced on November 8th, 1983. I asked why they had kept it hidden. She said, because men forget. I asked what she meant. She said that Bishop Jacob Yoder had written the Ordnung in 1887 after a land dispute nearly destroyed the Gmay. A deacon had sold 20 acres to an English developer without asking the community. The developer had built a tavern. The tavern had brought drinking and fighting and English ways into the heart of the Gmay. Bishop Yoder had written the 8th rule to make sure it never happened again. He had given a copy to every family, but over time, the copies had been lost, or burned, or forgotten. Except for the one in the Loom. I stood there looking at the paper. I did not know what to say. Leah did not wait for me to speak. She said the easement I had signed violated the 8th rule. She said the Gmay vote on September 29th had not been a written consent. It had been a show of hands. She said the Ordnung required written consent, signatures, documentation, proof that 2/3 of the Gmay had agreed in a way that could not be disputed or forgotten. I told her the vote had been clear, 187 in favor. She said a show of hands was not the same as a signature. I told her the Turnpike Commission would not care about an Ordnung from 1887. She said the Turnpike Commission would care about a contract signed by someone who had no legal authority to sign it. I told her I was the bishop. I had the authority. She said not according to Bishop Jacob Yoder, and not according to the Ordnung that had governed Gmay for 96 years. I did not know what to do. I told Leah I would need time to think. She said there was no time. The construction was scheduled to begin on November 14th. That gave us 6 days. I asked what she wanted me to do. She said I needed to tell the Turnpike Commission that the easement agreement was void, that I had signed it without proper authority, that the Gmay had not given written consent. I told her they would not accept that. She said they would have to. I told her they would take us to court. She said let them. I told her we do not go to court. She said, then we lose our land. I told her I was trying to protect the Gmay. She said I was protecting my own authority. That stopped me, because it was true. Let me tell you about eminent domain, because this is the key to everything Leah understood that I did not. Eminent domain is the power of the government to take private property for public use. It is written into the 5th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The government must provide just compensation, but the property owner cannot refuse. In Pennsylvania in 1983, the Turnpike Commission had used eminent domain to acquire more than 4,000 acres of farmland for highway expansion. Most families had accepted the compensation and moved on. A few had fought in court. None had won. The Amish do not fight in court. We do not hire lawyers. We believe in submission to authority. Gelassenheit. We believe that losing land is better than losing our souls in a courtroom. That belief had made us easy targets. The Turnpike Commission knew we would not fight. They knew our bishops would sign. And they were right. Until Leah Zook unfolded a piece of paper from 1887 and proved that I had no authority to sign. I spent the next 3 days reading the Ordnung document. I checked the signature. I checked the wax seal. I checked the date. I asked Deacon Miller if he had ever heard of the 8th rule. He said he had not. I asked Minister Lapp if he remembered Bishop Yoder ever mentioning it. He said Bishop Yoder had died in 1923, 60 years ago, and no one alive remembered his exact words. I asked the oldest man in our Gmay, Samuel Stoltzfus, 91 years old, if his father had ever spoken of a written Ordnung. He said his father had mentioned that Bishop Yoder was very particular about land, that he did not trust deacons or ministers to make decisions about property, that he believed only the whole Gmay could decide. But Samuel had never seen the document. No one had, except Leah Zook and the women in her family who had hidden it in a loom for 4 generations. On November 11th, 3 days before construction was set to begin, I called another meeting of the Gmay. This time I did not ask for a show of hands. I brought the Ordnung document. I read the 8th rule out loud. I explained that the easement agreement I had signed on October 3rd violated that rule. I explained that Leah Zook had brought this to my attention. I explained that if the rule was valid, then the easement agreement was void, and if the agreement was void, then the Turnpike Commission had no legal right to begin construction. I asked the Gmay what they wanted me to do. The room was silent. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Deacon Miller stood. He said the Ordnung was clear. He said I had acted in good faith, but without proper authority. He said the Gmay needed to vote again, this time in writing, this time with signatures, this time according to the rule that Bishop Yoder had written 96 years ago. I asked how many believed we should honor the easement agreement. 43 people signed their names. I asked how many believed we should void the agreement and refuse the easement. 197 people signed their names. 3 people abstained. Let me tell you why written consent matters in Amish law. Because this is what changed everything. A show of hands can be forgotten. A signature cannot. The written vote was the opposite of the show of hands 6 weeks earlier. When people had to sign their names, when they had to be accountable not just to me, but to the Ordnung and to Bishop Yoder and to 4 generations of history, they chose differently. On November 12th, I hired an English driver to take me and Deacon Miller to Harrisburg. The drive took 2 hours. I brought the Ordnung document. I brought the written vote from November 11th. I brought the easement agreement I had signed on October 3rd. I told them the agreement was void. I told them I had signed it without proper authority. I told them the Gmay had not given written consent as required by our governing rules. The man across the desk from me was named Richard Halloran. He was the regional director. He had been with the Turnpike Commission for 19 years. He looked at the Ordnung document. He looked at the written vote. He looked at me. He said the easement agreement was a legal contract. He said I had signed it in the presence of witnesses. He said it had been notarized. He said the compensation had been issued. He said construction would begin on November 14th as scheduled. I told him the contract was not valid if the person who signed it had no authority to sign it. He said I was the bishop. I had the authority. I told him not according to the Ordnung that had governed our community since 1887. He said he did not care about our internal rules. I said he would care if we took him to court. That stopped him, because the Amish do not go to court. Everyone knows that. But I had just threatened to do exactly that. Richard Halloran asked if I was serious. I said I was. He asked if I understood what a court case would cost. I said I did not care. He asked if I had a lawyer. I said I would find one. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at the Ordnung document again. He looked at the written vote. He looked at the date, 1887. He said he would need to consult with the commission's legal team. He said he would call me within 24 hours. I said construction was scheduled to begin in 48 hours. He said he was aware. I left the document on his desk. I left the written vote. I left the easement agreement. I did not leave my authority. I had already lost that the moment Leah Zook unfolded a piece of paper from a loom. On the morning of November 14th, 1983, a neighbor came to tell me there was a message at the phone shanty. I walked to the shanty and called the number back. It was Richard Halloran. He said the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission was withdrawing the easement application. He said their legal team had reviewed the Ordnung document. He said they had determined that a contract signed by someone without proper authority, under their own governing rules, could be challenged in court. He said the cost of litigation was not worth the value of the easement. He said they would reroute the highway expansion through a different section of Lancaster County. He said the compensation checks should be returned. He said the matter was closed. I thanked him. I walked back to my farm. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I did not feel relief. I did not feel victory. I felt the weight of 32 years of decisions I had made, believing I had the authority to make them. Decisions about land. Decisions about discipline. Decisions about who could stay in the Gmay and who had to leave. Decisions I had made alone. Decisions I had never asked the Gmay to vote on in writing. Decisions that might have been wrong. I hired the driver to take me to Leah Zook's farm that afternoon. I did not call ahead. I did not ask permission. I walked up to her door and knocked. She answered. I asked if I could come in. She stepped aside. I walked into her sitting room. The Ordnung document was on the table. She had not put it back in the loom. I picked it up. I read the 8th rule again. I read the signature at the bottom. Bishop Jacob Yoder. I read the date. April 12th, 1887. I put the document down. I looked at Leah. I said I did not know this document existed. She said I should have asked. I said I had been bishop for 32 years. She said that did not mean I knew everything. I said I had acted in good faith. She said good faith without knowledge is just guessing. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I stood there for 40 seconds. Then I nodded once, and I left. Let me tell you about the 1887 Ordnung, because without it, what happened next makes no sense. The Ordnung is not a single document. It is a living set of rules that governs every aspect of Amish life. What we wear, what we drive, what we build, how we worship, how we discipline, how we make decisions. Every Gmay one has its own Ordnung. Some are written, most are not. Most are passed down through oral tradition, from bishop to bishop, from generation to generation. The problem with oral tradition is that it changes, not intentionally, not maliciously, but slowly. A rule that was absolute in 1887 becomes flexible in 1920. A rule that was flexible in 1920 becomes forgotten in 1950. And by 1983, no one remembers why the rule existed in the first place. Bishop Jacob Yoder understood this. He had watched a land dispute nearly destroy the Gmay in 1886. So Bishop Yoder wrote the Ordnung down. He wrote it in German. He wrote it on parchment. He sealed it with red wax. And he gave a copy to every family. He told them that the Ordnung was not his authority. It was the community's authority. And no bishop, no deacon, no minister could override it. But over 96 years, the copies were lost. Except for one. The one that Leah Zook's great-grandmother had hidden in a loom. The one that 4 generations of women had protected. The one that proved I had been wrong. She thinks she knows better than the bishop. That's Hochmut. That was what they said about Leah Zook in the weeks after the easement was voided. I heard it at the Amish auction barn. I heard it at Sunday service. I heard it from Deacon Miller's son when he drove his buggy past her farm and saw her measuring the boundary line with wooden stakes and hemp rope. A woman who cannot submit is a danger to the whole Gmay. That was what Deacon Miller said to his son. I was not there. But the boy told his mother, and his mother told my wife, and my wife told me. I did not correct Deacon Miller. I did not defend Leah. I did not explain that she had not acted out of pride. She had acted out of knowledge. Knowledge that I did not have. Knowledge that the Gmay had forgotten. Knowledge that had been hidden in a loom for 4 generations, because men forget. But I said nothing, because saying something would have meant admitting that I had been wrong, and I was not ready to do that. Not yet. Leah's land looked like none of the other farms in our Gmay. Deacon Miller's 52 acres were planted in straight rows of corn, green, uniform, weed-free. His barn was painted red. His fences were painted white. His buggy was parked in a straight line with his plow and his harrow. Everything was in order. Everything was according to Ordnung. Everything was approved by the Gmay. Leah's 47 acres were planted in a pattern I did not understand. Corn mixed with clover. Sunflowers scattered between the rows. No white fences, just split-rail walnut. No painted barn, just weathered gray wood. But the soil was darker, softer, and when it rained, the water did not pool in her fields. It soaked in within 20 minutes. Deacon Miller's fields pooled for 3 days. I noticed that. I did not say anything about it, but I noticed. Let me tell you about the physics of land surveying, because this is the year that proved what a single measurement error could destroy. Land surveying in 1983 was done with electronic theodolites, machines that measured angles and distances using infrared light, accurate to within 1 centimeter over 1 kilometer. The Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission used these machines to map the easement route. They used satellite data. They used computer calculations. They used technology that was supposed to be infallible. But technology is only as good as the data it starts with. And the data the Turnpike Commission started with was a map from 1889. A map that had been drawn by hand. A map that had been copied and recopied 6 times over 94 years. a map that had a 2-degree error in the baseline angle. 2 degrees does not sound like much, but over a distance of 3 miles, 2 degrees becomes a lateral error of 553 feet. The Turnpike Commission's survey placed the easement route through the center of Leah Zook's 47 acres. But the actual property line, measured with wooden stakes and hemp rope using the triangulation method that Amish surveyors had used since 1750, was 553 feet to the east. The easement route did not cross Leah's land at all. It crossed land owned by the county, land that had been set aside for public use in 1889, land that the Turnpike Commission could have taken without compensation, without an easement agreement, without my signature, if they had measured correctly. But they had not. And Leah Zook had proven it, not with a machine, not with a computer, with wooden stakes and a length of rope. On the 3rd Sunday of November, I stood in front of the Gmay and read the 8th rule of the 1887 Ordnung out loud. I explained that I had violated that rule when I signed the easement agreement on October 3rd. I explained that Leah Zook had brought the violation to my attention. I explained that the Turnpike Commission had withdrawn the easement application. I explained that the land was safe. I did not apologize. I did not ask for forgiveness. I simply stated the facts. When one sheep refuses to follow, the whole flock is at risk. That was what I had said 6 weeks earlier. I had been talking about Leah. But as I stood there reading the Ordnung, I realized I had been wrong. Leah had not refused to follow. She had refused to follow me. And there is a difference. Following the Ordnung is not the same as following the bishop. Following the community is not the same as following one man. I had confused the two. For 32 years I had confused the two. And it had taken a widow with a loom to show me the difference. Leah Zook farmed those 47 acres alone from 1979 to 1995. 16 consecutive years without a single loan, without a single male family member to help. In those 16 years, her soil organic matter climbed from 2.8% to 6.1%. More than double. Her corn yield averaged 94 bushels per acre. The county average over the same period was 87. Her water retention reached 4.2 inches per foot of soil, 3 times the county average of 1.4 inches. Her earthworm count hit 180 per cubic foot, 12 times the starting count of 15. She never hired a surveyor. She never hired a lawyer. She never asked the bishop for permission. And on November 14, 1983, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission withdrew the easement application. I went back to Leah's house one more time. It was late November. The fields were bare. The harvest was in. I knocked on her door. She answered. I asked if I could see the loom. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. I walked into the sitting room. The loom was in the corner. Walnut, built in 1887. I walked over to it. I ran my hand along the frame. The wood was smooth, worn, polished by 100 years of hands. I asked if I could open the drawer. She nodded. I pulled the small drawer beneath the warped threads. It was empty now. The Ordnung document was on the table, not in the loom. I asked, why her great-grandmother had hidden it there. Leah said, because a loom is where women work, and men do not pay attention to where women work. I asked why the women in her family had kept it hidden for so long. She said, because they were waiting for the right time. I asked how they knew this was the right time. She said they did not. But when I signed the easement agreement without asking the Gmay for written consent, her mother told her it was time to unfold the paper. Her mother had died 3 weeks later, on October 24th, 1983. She had lived just long enough to see her daughter prove that Bishop Jacob Yoder had been right, that men forget, and that sometimes the only way to remember is to hide the truth where men will not look. Asking Bishop Stoltzfus to admit he had violated the 1887 Ordnung was like asking a man to admit his entire ministry had been built on sand. He had served for 32 years. He had signed hundreds of documents. He had never been questioned. And now, a widow with a loom had proven that his authority was not absolute. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply acknowledged the truth. And then he walked away. Because sometimes that is all a man can do. Sometimes the most radical thing a bishop can do is admit he was wrong. Sometimes the document hidden for 4 generations is the document that saves a community. And sometimes a widow with a loom knows more about authority than the man who has held it for 32 years. Leah Zook unfolded a piece of paper. She voided a contract. The land stayed whole. That is the story. That is what happened. That is what I will remember when I stand before God and account for every decision I made as bishop. I will remember the loom. I will remember the Ordnung. And I will remember that Leah Zook taught me the difference between authority and power. Authority comes from the community. Power comes from a title. I had the title. She had the authority. And in the end, authority won. If someone in your family left you knowledge instead of money, if they showed you how to read the land or how to protect what is yours, tell me about them in the comments. This is the Plain and Simple Farm.